The first thing I noticed wasn't the silence. It was the lack of everything else. No creak of floorboards from the apartment above. No distant wail of a siren. Not even the gentle hum of the refrigerator. I'd just moved into apartment 4B, a place I found online for a suspiciously good price. The listing photos showed a clean, if Spartan, one bedroom, and the landlord, a man named Mr. Abernathy, had been all smiles during the virtual tour. He'd mentioned something about the building being well insulated, which I'd taken as a positive. A quiet space to work from home? Perfect. I dropped my first box of books on the hardwood floor. It landed with a dull, unsatisfying thud. Not the sharp, echoing crack I expected, but a sound that seemed to die the instant it was born. I chalked it up to the box being heavy. I clapped my hands together. Again, just a flat, lifeless smack. It was like clapping in a vacuum. I laughed, a short, sharp bark of a sound. It felt strange, like the sound was being snatched out of my mouth before it could even travel to my own ears. This was beyond well insulated. This was absorbent. The first few days were a novelty. I'd walk around, deliberately scuffing my shoes, snapping my fingers, singing off-key, just to experience the weird acoustic deadness. Every sound was intimate, personal, existing only for me in the split second it was created. When I spoke on the phone, my own voice felt disconnected, as if I were listening to a recording of myself, with all the room tone stripped out. My friends on the other end said I sounded fine, but to me, it was unnerving. The natural feedback loop of hearing my own voice bounce back at me was gone. This absence of echo started to mess with my head. I became hyper-aware of every little noise I made. The rustle of my clothes was like sandpaper against my eardrums. The clink of a fork against a ceramic plate was jarring. The sound of me chewing my food became thunderous, a wet, mechanical grinding that I'd never been so conscious of before. I started eating softer foods, moving around the apartment like a burglar in my own home, terrified of the sheer volume of my own existence. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy. It was a presence. It pressed in on me, making the small apartment feel even more claustrophobic. I'd stand in the middle of the living room and just listen, straining to hear something, anything, from the outside world. I pressed my ear against the shared wall with 4 and nothing. I put my head to the window overlooking the street. Silence. It was as if apartment 4B was a pocket dimension, a tear in the fabric of the audible world. I started leaving the TV on all the time, not to watch it, but just to have a constant source of sound. The canned laughter from sitcoms and the dramatic swells of movie scores were my only companions. But even they sounded wrong. The sound came directly from the speakers, and then just stopped. It didn't fill the room. It just fired sound waves in a straight line into my ears, feeling artificial and hollow. The isolation began to take its toll. Working from home became a nightmare. In video meetings, I felt like I was shouting into a void. I couldn't gauge the volume of my own voice. Was I too loud? Too quiet? My colleagues started asking if I was okay. They said I seemed distant, distracted. I was constantly monitoring my own sounds, my own breathing. I found myself holding my breath for long periods, just to escape the grating noise of it. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. The oppressive quiet was making my skin crawl. I needed to prove I wasn't going insane. I grabbed my laptop and opened an audio recording program. I'd seen people do this online to test the acoustics of a room. I set the microphone to its highest sensitivity. I hit record. Then, I let out a yell. A full-throated, guttural scream of frustration and fear. The sound felt huge in my throat, a primal roar that should have shaken the very walls. It left my mouth and vanished instantly. I coughed, my throat raw. I stopped the recording and put on my headphones, my heart pounding. I clicked play. Nothing. Not a whisper. Not a blip on the waveform. It was a perfect, flat line. Dead silence. The microphone was working. I tested it just before. The program was working, but the recording was empty. It was as if the scream had never happened. As if the room had not just absorbed the sound, but erased it from existence. My blood ran cold. This wasn't insulation. This was something else. Something hungry. I started digging online. I searched for apartment absorbs sound, room with no echo, acoustic black hole. I found forums discussing anechoic chambers, rooms designed by scientists to be the quietest places on Earth. But this was a cheap rental, not a high-tech lab. Then, buried deep in a message board about urban legends, I found a post from 7 years ago. The title was The Silent Apartment. The user described an apartment, number 4B, in a pre-war building that consumed sound. They talked about the same suffocating quiet, the same self-consciousness, the same feeling of being utterly alone, even in a city of millions. They talked about how they started to lose their sense of self, their personality muffled, along with their voice. The post ended abruptly. "It's starting to take more than just the sound," it read. "I feel it feeding on me. I have to get out." There were no further posts from that user. Panic set in. I looked around the room at the plain beige walls. They seemed to pulse, to breathe. Was this place feeding on sound? Or was sound just the appetizer? What was it feeding on exactly? Presence? Energy? Sanity? I decided I had to leave. I didn't care about the lease or my security deposit. I started packing, throwing my things into boxes with a frantic energy. This time, the thuds and scrapes of my frantic packing didn't bother me. They were a sign of life, a rebellion against the crushing silence. I worked through the night, fueled by adrenaline and terror. As I packed my laptop, I glanced at the audio file I'd recorded. The flat line, evidence, proof. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Mr. Abernathy, the landlord. The subject line was checking in. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Hi there," it read. "Just wanted to see how you're settling into 4B. I do hope you're enjoying the peace and quiet. Most tenants find it uniquely calming. Let me know if you need anything at all." The cheerful, innocuous words felt like a threat. He knew. He had to know what this place was. With my last box packed, I stood at the door, key in hand. I took one last look at the apartment. It looked exactly the same as when I arrived. Clean, Spartan, quiet. But it felt different. It felt ancient and predatory. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The change was immediate and overwhelming. The hum of the building's electricity, a faint sound of a television from 4A, the distant rumble of the subway, it all came flooding back in a glorious, chaotic wave of noise. I could hear my own footsteps echoing on the tile. I laughed, and the sound bounced off the walls, bright and real and alive. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I didn't look back. I ran down the stairs, burst out into the street, and drank in the symphony of the city. The honking cars, the chatter of pedestrians, the music leaking from a storefront. It was all there. I was back in the world of sound. Weeks later, in my new, noisy, beautifully imperfect apartment, I still have the audio file. The perfect flat line of silence where a scream should be. Sometimes, when the world gets too quiet, I play it. Not to remember the fear, but to remember that I escaped. I often wonder who lives in apartment 4B now. I wonder if they've noticed the unnatural quiet yet. I wonder how long it will take before they start to feel the silence pressing in, before they realize the room isn't just quiet, it's listening. And it's hungry. And eventually, it will get fed.